Welcome back to the table. Today, Nelson and I, and Ryan, who's off camera right now, we just played Evenfall. This is a new game from Nanox and coming from DLP. And if you've probably haven't seen much on this because Rado is the only one who's done anything with it. And he had some high praise to offer this game after his plays of it. So we were very interested in getting it played, so we did. And I have to say, first off, I think the reaction of all three of us was pretty positive.
Yeah, very positive.
Yeah, this is a game, there's a lot of things going on here, but largely, would you agree this is a Tableau builder?
Yes, kind of. I mean, like, it's got elements of Tableau,
Yes.
elements of engine building, which kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Worker placement, there's a lot
That's
happening.
That is true. The worker placement, it's in the game, but it's not the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
Although it is a big part of the game.
Yeah, I think I described it similar to like Lost Ruins of Arnak, where like the worker placement is kind of a medium part of the game until you need the worker
Yes.
placement spot, and then it's like, oh, please don't take that, please don't take that. But it's very much kind of like a secondary portion to the game from like your Tableau engine building.
Yeah, for sure. To me, it feels like you're doing that, and a lot of the worker placement spots actually come from the Tableau that you're building, so you kind of have to build your way into being able to use your workers. What we found in the first round, you're not even using all of your workers necessarily, and then you use more and more. So the game does ramp. Like the first round, there's 3 rounds, and the game ramps, so the second round feels a lot longer and more significant, and the third round probably even more so.
Yeah, it's one of the bigger ramps in a game that I've seen
Yeah.
in a long time, where at the end of the first round, I was like, this game needs to be longer. And then at the end of the second round, I was like, this is a big game. This is a good game. Like,
all of us said that after the first round was like, oh, is there only going to be 3 rounds?
Right.
I'm
gonna
not
be a
so sure.
25-minute game.
Yeah, it felt like, how are we going to get much done in those?
Right.
But then it really blows up. So what you're doing, you're probably wondering, we are covens of witches and elder witches, if you will, and we're trying to amass cards in our outer circle, but then trying to bring them to the inner circle, if you will, because that is where they can score. All the cards, when they're in your outer circle, most of them are going to give you ongoing abilities, spots that you can go to with your witches, all sorts of different things like that, but they're not worth any points up there. All the cards and things that you have in that outer circle do have points and things printed on them, but you need to bring them down to this lower area, the inner circle, to score them. The rub is, once they're down here, you can no longer harvest those things, which is interesting because that's the other thing the cards have them, is resources to harvest, which you're going to do typically once per round using a token, but some factions, we didn't mention this, asymmetric powers.
Oh, yeah.
You can play the game without the asymmetric powers, but I would highly recommend playing with them because these are the kinds of powers where you're like envious of everyone else's power and they're envious of yours at times.
And this type of asymmetric power almost helps me learn a game where it gives me a direction to go.
For sure.
And it's like, this is my faction, this is what I need to do. It's like, cool. When a game is so big and so sandboxy, it can provide direction, which can be beneficial, especially for some of those first plays, but also they're just so much fun.
Yeah, so what are you doing? We're going to go through this really quick. On your turn, you're going to be taking some actions, but each season or each year is broken up into 4 different steps or phases. The first one is the scouting phase. The scouting phase is where everyone's simultaneously just going to collect the resources. At the top of every player's board, it shows what you get. In the asymmetric version, it's going to be different across different factions, but you're going to get some resources, you're going to get some cards out of the main deck, and in some cases, in my case, I was able to actually, that is when I harvested. Instead of when I flipped my token, I harvested all my resources then. So in the first round, I really didn't get many because you don't have anything hardly up there. But later, I was benefiting from keeping a lot of cards up there so that when I harvested, I was just getting a ton of stuff up there. Then the next phase is sort of the meat and potatoes. This is where you're going to be taking your actions.
Yeah. And there's a lot of actions, and you can do them in any order. It's a one action pass type system, so turns are very quick and snappy, which is awesome. But kind of the first thing that you can do is you can go out into the middle section here to one of these locations. There's the northern, central, and southern location, and place your witches out there to discover a place of power. And so these come out of the power deck, and you can go in here and say, if I place 2 witches, I could grab something that costs 2 witches, and it would go into my outer circle.
Yeah. These places of power are going to be spaces where you can play the other cards from your hand, the rituals. All the cards in your hand are going to be made up of a few different types. There are ritual cards, and in the rituals there are several different sort of subtypes. And then there are cards that are either specialists or council members, and they are also the same card. You can see here, this is a specialist. If when I play it over here, it's a council member if I play it down here. You'll find a lot of multi-use situations going on, not just like that, but you're going to be able to trade cards in for resources at any time, things like that. So if you like multi-use cards, this might be your cup of tea. But yeah, those places of power give you your spaces. Think of games like Bruges, or even something like Seasons, where you can't just play cards willy-nilly. You have to kind of prepare a space for them and then play cards. It makes for an interesting thing. The other thing you can do is activate your clan token. Everyone has this clan token up here, and like I said, most people's have that harvest icon on them. Mine doesn't. Mine has a unique other power, but you flip that over and you basically do whatever that says. And in, like I said, in most cases, that's when people are going to collect all of their harvesting. And then the other thing you could do here is to play one of those cards like we said. Now, when you're playing a card, like I said, if it's a ritual, you're going to play it on one of your places of power. And your places of power might be up here. They have to start there, but they might come down here from time to time. And if there's an empty place of power down here, you could place a card down there as well. But when you play a card, you're going to play rituals here. You might play a specialist over here. You might play a council over here. All of these are going to have costs. The cards have a cost in the upper left-hand corner. When you play them, you know, the rituals have all the things you'd expect in a card tableau building Euro. You've got instant effects. You've got ongoing powers. In fact, I'll just pause here. Ongoing powers in this game, there's a ton of them.
Yeah, and there's every single one that was played, we're like, ooh, that's cool. Like, you're looking over, like, that seems crazy. And every single one of them modifies the game in a sense that you're going to come to this table and play a completely different game every single time you sit down. I do think that's one of my little concerns about the game is how many of these ongoing effects there are.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of tracking, for sure. I mean, as long as you're okay with making sure and going through things systematically and not forgetting things. But even in our play, there were times where like, oh, I forgot I had this card. So when I did this thing, I was supposed to get a resource. And no one else at the table loves it when a player does that. You're like, are you sure you forgot? Are you taking an extra resource? So there is a little bit of that. But yeah, you play those cards and they do all sorts of different things. There might be some end of game scoring for the council members. They might have some ongoing powers. Some of the specialists have cards where you can sort of effectively exhaust them or tap them once per round to use a power. The variety here is pretty significant.
Yeah.
And some of the only rules there is like there's 2 of each specialist in the deck. You can't play both of those specialists as a specialist. You could play one as a council member, but that is the only rule. Otherwise, you can play the same card multiple times as rituals and things like that, as you'll see with Nelson's Tableau over here. But the card play is really where it's at.
Yeah, and you very much build your own engine. So my faction here, the Star, was all about getting a lot of cards, but then I could discard the cards for a wild resource. And so now I was, seeing a lot of cards, and I could fine-tune my engine. So when I'm moving up on this track over here, which I guess we haven't really talked about the track, but these are also asymmetric, which is really cool. Just another way to score or get bonuses during the game. As you move up on the track, I was getting cards. And so I had the specialist. It was one of the opening hand cards. And so I was like, oh, this is going to be cool because I value cards very highly with my faction. Let's focus on this track because I know I'm going to be able to accelerate into it.
Yeah, Nelson easily had the best engine in the game. Now, he scored most of his points during the game, which is interesting because it was kind of a bit different than me and Ryan. We scored more of our points towards the end of the game. But now let's talk about the placing of the workers, if you will, the witches and the elders. There's some important things to know here. The different places you can place them out in these regions out here, and there's a few spaces. Each region has a couple action spaces that's associated with a particular action. They usually trade a card for some resources or a resource for 2 other resources, things like that. But they also have this big space here, which is where you're going to place those workers to get one of those things like Nelson mentioned earlier. However, there's also the cards that you get, like this and these two, where you can also place workers. Now, typically, you can only place elders in this bottom row. They can only go down here. They can't go anywhere else. Now, there are some things that allow you to break those rules, which I did over here, but my faction let me break that rule by placing my elders up here. And you have, I think, what, 4 elders
Four
and
elders.
5 witches.
I think it's 4 and 4.
4 and 4? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it looks like it. I could place my elders in this top row, which allowed me to keep my cards up in this top row a little bit longer instead of bringing them down systematically so that my elders could be made use of. Because this game is about trying to use those workers. And in that first round, like we said, I think a lot of us had a few elders left.
I think I only used 1.
You only used 1 in the first round.
Yeah.
And then in round 2 and 3, I think all those used all of them.
Yeah.
Completely.
Able to pull them
But it's
down.
really an interesting thing because you're kind of building your own worker placement game here. Like I said, these spots, they're definitely used because there's another thing that will be taken into account here. But most of the things you're trying to do is utilize the powers that you have here in front of you with those worker placement spots.
Yeah. And then kind of one of the last action that you can do is on all of your ritual sites, you can place either a scythe token or a orb token. And those do different things. So the scythe token, when that field is harvested, when that ritual site is harvested, it doubles the harvest power of that site. So now you're wanting to see how long you can keep those scythe tokens up in that top row, but again, they don't score unless you bring them down to the bottom row, so you can get more resources because that's the main resource income. The orb allows you to increase on the coven track, which provides asymmetric bonuses. So mine was all about getting different mana and resources, basically, or victory points.
Yeah, so once everyone's taken all of their actions and passed, then you're going to go on to the next phase, which is the battle. The battle, you're going to go from top to bottom here and resolve each of these areas with area control. Now, the power that you have in this area starts with the number of witches that you have here. So in this case, red has 2 and blue has 4. However, mana is the thing that we're going to be tracking here that you collect from a variety of different sources. At the beginning of each battle, everyone takes this little meter here and sort of not bids, but dedicates some amount of their mana.
Feels very scythe-like.
To this battle, yes. So everyone puts their thing out, flips it over. You add the mana to your natural strength here to get your overall strength, and this does a couple things. One, whoever has the most is going to get a power stone. The power stones are things that you can effectively use to enhance the scoring at the end of the game. But everyone is going to get some of these battle rewards depending on how much your total strength was. So you can see each of these have a 4 or more, 6 or more, 8 or more reward on all of those sites. If you have 8 or more, you don't just get the 8 or more, you get the 8 or more, the 6 or more, and the 4 or more. So it's yet another way to get some things and to get some things done in the game that you would otherwise do sort of during your normal turn.
Right, so let's talk about who this game is for.
Yeah.
After I played it, I feel like this is kind of the souped up, like even heavier version of like a Earth or a Wingspan, where you're kind of building an engine and then activating those engines, where you have a tableau that is kind of your own. It's different than everyone else's, and then you kind of get to figure out exactly where you are wanting to put your places, your people, how to and when to move them down to your inner circle so that you can activate them with your elders. It's very much a, can I find the right cards for the strategy that I am running type game.
Yeah, I feel like to take that a step further and bring into other games, like I mentioned earlier, not just because you're preparing the places for cards, but Bruges and Seasons both have really robust opportunities to build interesting engines with your tableaus, and they're a little heavier than, say, like a Wingspan or an Earth. Whereas I see the connection there, but I would say this is definitely a step up from that. And one other point I want to make about this game, you said earlier, is kind of sandboxy. Unlike Earth, or a little less like Earth and Wingspan, where I think there's like a handful of routes, I think, to
Yeah.
get to points. The way you're getting points in this game is kind of all over the place. It's not, I don't know that I would use the term point salad for a game like this, but you are getting your points during the game. I mean, there's just cards that give you points. There's points printed on a lot of the cards. There's actions you can take where you can convert things into points. There's ongoing abilities like you had where it said you could take points instead of mana, right?
Right.
Yeah, like whenever he took mana, he could say, I'm just going to take points instead. So you're getting points all over the place, which led to a game where people could score their points during the game, or people could score their points at the end of the game, or maybe a little bit of both. And we all ended up relatively close. I think Ryan was at 150 something, you were at 120 something,
Yeah.
and I was just under 120 at like 117. So relatively close scores, but very, very different ways. I mean, you can look at just my Tableau here compared to Nelson's Tableau. We played very different games, and Ryan and I the entire time were just sitting there as Nelson was racking up massive points. He had a borderline exploitative engine going on where almost every card he had was, I'll do this, and all of my cards benefit me.
Yeah.
And he was scoring tons of points throughout the game. I think right before the end of the game, you were ahead by tens and tens of points. It was really, really interesting. And then Ryan on the flip side scored a ton during end of game. I was kind of in the middle and came in last, of course. But my point is, if you like games that allow people to find their points in many, many different ways, and you're looking for those different things as you play the game instead of the game telling you, here's the 3 ways.
Right.
Then I would say this is a game for you. On the flip side, if you don't like that,
Right.
if you want to be said, oh, this is how you score your points. There's 2 ways to score points. This is what everyone is doing in the game. This might be a lot for players like that. But like I said, if you enjoyed games like Seasons and Bruges and games where you're building a really robust tableau to find your own points, this game is for you. Who else would you say it's not for?
Ooh, if you are someone who does not want to search and find the nitty-gritty interactions of everything, something that we were talking about earlier in the video is all those little bonuses, which I find very satisfying and also very hard to remember some of the time. But whenever I place my worker here, I get that benefit, which actually triggers this card, which is going to help me over here. If that is not something that you find satisfying, I think that this game is probably not going to be for you.
Now, I will say most people find that satisfying.
Yes.
I've never met a person who doesn't find it satisfying. However, if I have a hard time tracking all of that, then it's problematic. But even then, like as long as you're playing at a table, like there was a couple times where I forgot to take my thing. His engine was so crazy. I'm surprised you did keep track of everything because he had so many cards firing and triggering off of one another. It was amazing.
I think I probably lost about 20 points or so.
Oh, well, so you won.
I probably won. I probably
won. Probably won. But yes, that can be an overwhelming thing. I would say an electronic implementation of this. If this game was on BGA,
oh my goodness,
and it basically just checked with you, like, hey, remember, you get a point here. Do you want that point? Yes. So there are a little of those things in there. In terms of who else it's not for, honestly, I really don't know because I really think this game is a big winner. I mean, if you're a fan of Euros and a fan of really satisfying tableau builders, this game, I have to agree with Rado. It's good. It's good. It's going to be a top contender this year. I believe this is an Essen release. We're going to definitely get more plays of it. In fact, we might try to get a round 1 sort of playthrough just so you can see how it plays with 2 players on the channel. Anything else to add before we wrap?
I found it very satisfying. The combos were so unique, and we played 3 very different games and came so close to each other in that final scoring, which to me just feels like a very well-balanced and a very well-designed game.
Yeah, it was really, really good. So if you have any questions about it, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer whatever we can. And as always, until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.